At my 70th birthday, my oldest son reached to spike my bourbon so they could knock me out and forged the sale of my house. I had learned 3 days earlier. The cameras were already rolling, and 2 officers were waiting outside. I set the glass down, smiled, and pressed record, the moment that ended their inheritance. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. I am 70, a grandfather, and until this summer I still cooked Sunday gravy for children who would not look me in the eye. The cedar house I live in by the lake smells like lemon oil and rosemary because that is the way Marie, my late wife, kept it. She taught me to wipe down the handrails and the dining table with a cloth that was barely damp, and then let the sun do the rest. When the afternoon light hits the floorboard seam by the stove, it shows the grooves where our daughter Elena dragged a chair at age 5 to help stir sauce and splash tomatoes like fireworks. I have worked 2 jobs, carried mortgages and student loans and a parade of last-minute emergencies for 3 adult children who will each tell you I never did enough. Mark is the oldest. He has shoulders like mine used to be and eyes that never settle on anything for long. He has been almost successful a dozen times and always just needed a little more runway. His wife, Dana, texts me once a month about the children's school fund and signs every message with a row of praying hands, which I suppose is a modern way to invoice your father-in-law. Elena is my middle child, quick, organized, and perpetually disappointed in me for things I did not know I was expected to do. Her husband, Theo, has a voice that carries in a room. And my youngest, Patrick, learned early that if he kept a sweetness in his tone he could slide anything past me, car insurance, deposits, the rent on a place he did not live in. They agree on almost nothing except that I should be more generous and less inconvenient. On Tuesday, 3 days before my 70th birthday party, Mark pocket dialed me at 2 in the afternoon. I heard bar noise behind him, the thick clink of glassware, and then his low voice the way he speaks when he thinks he is being intelligent. It is a particular music, Mark trying to sound like a plan. He said my house like it was a suitcase we could all climb into. He said notarized, and power of attorney, and sell while the market's hot. He said he would handle the dosing, and Theo, who was with him, snorted and told him not to use that word. Then the sound muffled, and I heard footsteps and the click of a lighter, and my son said, "We toast the old man, he is out in 10 minutes. Give me the pen." The call ended before I understood I had been holding my breath, a feeling like cold needles pricking the pads of my fingers. There are moments when you get to pretend you misheard. I made coffee and tried to stand inside that still, clean kitchen. The sun had already rolled past the seam by the stove, but the light still went hot over the wooden trim Marie had polished so many mornings. I thought of the time I took Mark, 16 and furious, to replace a fender he smashed, and how we ate greasy burgers on the curb without talking. I thought of the night Elena cried on our couch because Theo, then a boyfriend with a grin and huge promises, had not shown up, and how I sat with her and watched pirate shows until she slept. I thought of Patrick's arm, thin and feverish, tucked into mine when he was 8 and afraid of thunder. I played the message back and then plugged my phone into the little speaker in the den and played it again. The words were there, stripped of context and warmth. Not a thoughtless remark, not something that could be explained as a joke. A plan. And not just theft, something so lazy and cruel it knocked my memory of their infancy sideways. I am not as quick as I was at 50, but I am still a man who knows the feel of an axle in his hand. The click that means it is seated. I took a slow walk through the house that afternoon. The lemon oil, the old wool rug, the little dent in the floor where I had dropped a wrench 20 years ago. The cigar box that holds Marie's recipe cards, written in her slow, careful hand. I stood on the porch where we taught our eldest granddaughter, Lily, to blow on a spoon that held too hot soup, and she laughed and fanned the steam with a plastic fork. The house is not just wood and shingles. It is the map of the life I had with a woman who refused to let me put the tomato plants too close. It is where I promised her, when she knew she was leaving before I did, that I would keep the family together. I had kept that promise like a man bailing a boat with a shoe. Money is not affection, but it can be a tender clasp when all else wobbles, and I had pressed bills into unsteady hands for so long I had calluses. Dad, Mark would say, if you float me this one I will make it right. If there is a heaven, Marie stood at a window and watched me and shook her head and smiled in pity. I went upstairs to my desk, to the drawer where I kept a yellow folder labeled the boring stuff. I opened the folder and put my reading glasses on. I looked at the old will I had not updated since before Marie died. I looked at the durable power of attorney I had signed for Mark in a bad month 2 years ago when my back was out and I thought I would need him to pay a contractor. I had not revoked it, and it was like swallowing a coin to see. There is a type of shame in realizing the thing you kept for convenience could become a knife. I went to work. The first thing I did was make a list, because I am an old man and I make lists like I breathe. The second thing I did was call Ms. Valdez, the attorney who handled Marie's estate after. She is small and fierce and looks at me over the rims of her glasses like a teacher who knows whether you have done your homework. She picked up on the third ring and I told her my situation with more calm than I felt. She was quiet for 3 beats and then said in her even voice, "We tidy this up today." I drove to her office with the windows down and the radio off. We executed a revocation of that power of attorney and recorded it that same day. We drafted a new will with a no-contest clause that would disinherit anyone who tried to challenge it. We set up a living trust in my name as trustee with Ms. Valdez as co-trustee, and we transferred the house into it, with my right to live there until I die, and no ability for anyone to sell it without both signatures. We notarized, we recorded, we sent certified letters. Paper moves slower than hearts, but when it is stamped it walks incredibly far. Ms. Valdez looked at me when the ink was dry and said, "Do you want to involve the police?" I said I did not know, and that was true. My children do not think of me as someone who calls the police. But she handed me a paper anyway, names and phone numbers on it, and said, "Beverage tampering is not a prank." She also asked, "Do you have cameras?" I did not. She told me to buy some. The third thing I did was drive to a store and purchase small cameras that looked like buttons, a unit that could sit like a bookend on the shelf above my bar and capture the whole counter, and an extra one I could clip inside my shirt. The young man who sold them to me treated me like a veteran of some shadow war and tried to upsell me cloud storage and a subscription. I paid cash and left with a paper bag and a heart that felt like a fist. The fourth thing I did, after coffee and a walk around the block to bring my blood down, was call my friend Gus. He is retired from a job he will not state plainly, but you can see it in the way he sits down in a room and the way he does not drink more than 2. I met him at church after Marie died because grief pulled me like a magnet to people who know the weight of it. Gus listened. He made no noises. Then he said, "I will be there. We will do this right." The fifth thing I did was call my doctor under the pretense of discussing a refilled prescription, and I asked him if he would be willing to draw blood for me on Saturday morning after my party so I could bank a test that would show if I had something in my system. He is a cautious man, and he asked if I was feeling unwell. I said no, but there was a family matter and I needed a record. He said that was unusual, but he understood. He booked me for 8 the next morning and told me to bring a friend in case I was lightheaded from celebrating. I told him I would. The sixth thing I did was sit at the table and write a letter to my children, 3 letters really, in envelopes with their names on them. I told them the things they had already heard from me, small stories about their first days, the dog we had, the way their mother's handwriting looked in March, but I also told them I had put the house into a trust and that their opinion about it was as important as weather. I wrote that I had loved them with the muscles I had and that I was done being their floor. I did not sleep much that night. When the wind felt like it was whistling through the corners of the house, I got up and walked room to room. I put the button camera inside a framed photo of the breakfast nook and checked its view on the television. It saw the bar, the sink, the island where I would set the decanter. I clipped the other inside the placket of a shirt I laid out for Saturday. I practiced pressing the little wireless remote in my pocket. I taped a note to the inside of the cabinet where I kept the good bourbon, "Do not pour without thinking." I laughed when I did it, but the laugh was a crooked thing. The 7th thing I did was purchase a second bottle of the same bourbon, unremarkable but expensive enough to flatter Mark's sense of occasion. I used a marker to draw an invisible line on the glass, and I took 50 milliliters out and replaced them with tea, then shook until the color matched the original. I put that decanter in the front of the cabinet. The real decanter I put in the back, wrapped in a cardigan. I did not tell myself that I would entrap anyone. I told myself that I would see who my children were when they thought I would not. I also called Lily, my eldest granddaughter, Elena's little girl. She is 12 with a voice that tucks itself under the edges of the phone. She told me she had made me a card. I asked her what she liked best about my house. She said, "The light on the floor by the stove." I sat on the porch and said, "Me too." Saturday arrived clean after a morning rain. The cedar skin of the house drank it in and smelled like a forest. The banner on the porch read Happy 70th because Elena insisted at the last minute that 70 looks better in photographs than 71. She would edit captions later. The grill smoked in the yard. Theo tended it like he was commanding a ship. Dana came early with potato salad and a finger that pointed where people should park. Patrick texted that he would be late because his dog had a stomach issue. He did not have a dog last time I checked. Mark came with a gift he had not wrapped and the deep backslapping hug of a man who comes late bearing sunshine. Gus arrived in a light jacket, carrying a card and a 6-pack of non-alcoholic beer. He took me aside and put his face very close and said, "Steady." I nodded like I had a nail in my mouth and wanted to keep it. Guests floated in and out, old friends, neighbors, cousins I had not seen since Marie's funeral, my pastor and his wife, a couple from the hardware store. The house filled with the noise of people who think they are happy to see you. Inside, the camera watched without blinking. At 3 o'clock, Elena gathered everyone in the living room and gave the little speech she had written. It was the kind of speech she makes, contained, kind, a bit managerial. She thanked me for teaching her how to drive and for never raising your voice even when you should have. She looked at me and smiled like we share a secret. I do not think the secret was the same. Theo took over, which made sense because he loves microphones even when there are none. He told a story about how I once fixed his lawn mower by listening to it and tapping once with a screwdriver. He looked at me with admiration that landed just slightly to the right of me. He said, "To Dad," and held up his glass. "Let us toast," Elena said, and she touched my arm. "Dad, the good bourbon is in the cabinet, right?" I let the quiet slide through me. "Top left," I said. "By the glasses." Dana moved to the cabinet, and I watched, and my stomach did not flinch. She reached for the front bottle. Mark came around the island with his big smile and his easy laugh in his hand, and it looked like love. When he lifted the decanter out, the camera saw not his smile but the change in the liquid as he uncapped it. The room was full enough to give him a little intimacy. He tipped the neck toward my glass with his body blocking the view for everyone but the photographs and me. When nothing poured, because the bottle was not the bottle he had rehearsed, he blinked. His right hand touched his left wrist in the way it does when he is surprised. He covered it by joking with Theo about pouring too much for the birthday boy. I stood there with my hand on the back of my chair. I felt my pulse in the heel of my thumb. I pressed the remote in my pocket. "Wait," I said. My voice was stronger than my knees. "I would like to say something." Everyone turned, relieved, because people like to be told where to look when things start bending out of shape. "Before we drink," I said, "I have a little project." I picked up the television remote and the screen in the corner of the room lit up to the feed from the camera on the shelf. It showed the bar in perfect, flat light. I picked up the second remote and toggled the view to the clipped camera inside my shirt. The angle was tighter now, the decanter big and the glasses like a skyline. Theo laughed, a small startled burst. "We are on television," he said. "Yes," I said. "We are." On the television, with the kind of clarity that makes you feel a little ashamed to look, you could see Mark's hand move. You saw the way his fingers curled around his palm as if to shelter something very small. You saw him glance toward the cabinet and then toward the patio where Gus stood with his back to the room talking to the pastor. You saw him tilt his hand and the shine of the liquid deepen in my glass. The room found a new temperature. It is hard to describe. It is the difference between a window cracked for comfort and a window cracked because you smell smoke. Mark's smile pulled tight and then he looked at his feet as if he could read an escape plan down there. "Dad," he said, "come on." I toggled the view again. The other camera had caught Dana's fingers on the cap of the decanter, Elena's eyebrows drawn together as she watched, the way Theo leaned a little too close, the echo of collaboration. On the screen their faces were not malevolent, they were busy, practical, ordinary. That was the worst part. "Friends," I said, and I used the word deliberately, "I need you to hear something." I pressed one more button and the room filled with the sound of my son's voice from Tuesday, the bar noise, the words, "We toast the old man, he is out in 10 minutes. Give me the pen." Someone, maybe the woman from the hardware store, said, "Oh, no." Theo took a step forward, hands out, peaceable. "Okay," he said, and he was smiling in the way men smile when they are deciding between persuasion and attack. "We have gotten a little dramatic here." "What is this, really? A joke?" "Mark, tell your father." "No," I said. "Let my children tell me." Elena stood very straight like a girl in a picture. "Dad," she said, and I watched very carefully because I wanted it to be a misunderstanding, a planning for my future that did not involve stealing my breath from me. "We are worried about you." "I play cribbage on Thursdays," I said. "I mow my own lawn. I repaired the flicker in the bathroom light. And you plan to drug me at my birthday table." "Sedative," Mark said to Theo, without intending to say it aloud. The word rolled into the air like a fog. People were making tiny noises now, instinctive sounds of distress. Dana's face had hardened into something like stone. Patrick, who had arrived 10 minutes earlier smelling faintly like cologne and apology, swallowed and said, "I was not." I held up a hand. Old reflex, I had used the gesture to part fights in the hallway when they were small. "I know who poured," I said. "I know who told him." "That is enough for today." Gus stepped through the kitchen door as if he had been there the whole time. He wore his jacket zipped halfway, his posture casual, his eyes not casual. He nodded to me. On cue, or perhaps because we had moved into the part of the evening where a thing would either become a memory or an event, there was a knock on the front door. I had asked the local police to be nearby, and I had told them I did not expect to need them. I had also told them that I might. I went to the door and opened it. 2 officers stood there in crisp shirts, the younger one glancing at the older for cues. "Mr. Martin?" the older one asked. "We received a call." "Yes," I said. "Come in." If you have never watched the room you grew your children in fill with men and laws, it is a hard thing. The officers were professional. They did not want to embarrass anyone, I had told them that in my call. But they listened as I explained. They stood where the cameras could see them, and when I handed them the decanter I had earlier slipped inside a zip bag and sealed with tape, they were very careful with it. The younger officer asked me, "Do you know what they put in the drink?" And I said, "I know the smell changed." I pointed to the bottle with the invisible mark and said, "That one has not been poured." This was the decanter that was poured. The older officer nodded once. He said, "We can take possession of this." "We can go," Mark said loudly, to the room rather than to the officers. "This is a family thing." "It was," Gus said gently. "Now it is a textbook." There was a sound in me like an old hinge giving way, a mixture of relief and grief so strong I leaned against the doorjamb. "I wanted to tell you all something," I said, and my voice carried even though I do not command rooms. "The house is in a trust. My co-trustee is my attorney. Even if you had gotten me to sign what you brought," and here Elena's hand twitched toward the tote she had set under a chair, "it would not have sold this home. I revoked the old power of attorney. I filed it with the county. I am not a pushover anymore." For a beat, even the officers looked at me. It was not a speech, it was a man standing up straight. Dana was the first to move. She reached for Mark's wrist and squeezed. Her face said, "Not here, not now." Theo put his hands in his pockets, a theatrical gesture that always makes me think of a boy who has been told to stay out of the sugar. Elena's cheeks went red and pale and red again. She began to cry without sound. Patrick stared at the decanter as if it was a future he had not known he was walking toward. The older officer asked me quietly, "Would you like to make a formal report?" I said, "Yes." He nodded. He asked for the names of the people who handled the bottle and then he wrote them down without looking like he was placing a price on anything. He did not handcuff anyone, and for that I was grateful. He took the decanter and the small bag containing the little thing I had found in the pocket of Mark's jacket when he hung it on the chair, a blister pack with one empty circle. He did not look surprised. After the officers left, the party did not end so much as it exhaled and lay down. People poured themselves water, someone began to collect plates in a way that sounded like apology. Gus stood between me and the kitchen because he knows where a man will shoot his eyes when he is trying to be brave. The pastor put a hand on my shoulder and said, "We are here." Theo said, a little too loudly, "This is not what you think," and when no one agreed, he tried again with, "Everyone calm down." Elena walked toward me with the careful steps of a woman moving across ice. "Dad," she said, and I could hear the child in the word, "We were scared. You forget dates. You said the wrong name last week at Thanksgiving, you called Lily by mine." "I did," I said. "I will again someday. It is called getting older. It is not a license for you to take my life from me." She flinched as if I had struck her, and if I had had silk on my tongue I might have softened it. But silk is not what we needed anymore. Mark had been standing so still I had almost believed he could be a tree, a decoration. Now he moved. He looked at me with something like bewilderment, as if the rules had changed while he was parking the car. "When Mom was sick," he said, "you said we are a team." "I said that," I said. "And then I did the work and you did the asking." He nodded, an ugly little bob, and then he did something that hurt and did not surprise me. He tried to make it transactional again. "Dad," he said, "you know I am in a tight spot. If you want us to sign whatever you want us to sign, we can. But let us figure this out without bringing cops into it." Gus took a step forward then, just one. I put my hand out and patted his sleeve. "No," I said to Mark. "We are not negotiating on the porch I built with my own hands because you decided to put something in my drink. You will each receive a letter from me in the mail on Monday. You will not come by my house without calling. You will not ask me for money. If you file anything against the trust, I will fight it with the rest of my life. I have already made my report. If the district attorney decides to speak with you, you will speak with them like the adults you are." "You will ruin us," Dana said, and I noticed she had not said she was sorry. "No," I said. "You were going to ruin me." We could not continue standing there like figures on a porch in a storm. The pastor's wife began to shepherd the guests in the gentlest possible way. It was like watching someone put away a delicate Christmas creche one figurine at a time. People stopped by me to squeeze my hand or touch my elbow, the way people do when they do not have the right words and hope that touch is a translation of love. Lily slipped around the clusters of legs and came to my side like a little cat. She held out the card she had made. "It has the floor on it," she said. I looked and there it was, the stripe of light drawn in crayon, yellow on brown. "Thank you," I said, and I meant for everything. In the 2 days after, the air felt too clear. This is a strange thing to say, but it was as if the wind moved easier around the house now that I had stopped bracing every door with my body. At 8 the next morning, I went to the clinic with Gus and had my blood drawn, an act that felt both silly and essential. I handed over the file I had prepared, a statement, still photographs from the video, and the phone records. The looked-over corners of my life. The detective who called me 2 days later had the voice of a man who had spent a long time talking to people who were surprised they were caught. He told me the lab identified a sedative in the decanter residue. He told me the district attorney's office was reviewing. He told me that if I wanted to press charges, they would proceed; if I did not, they would still likely move forward. "It is not a prank," he said, echoing Ms. Valdez without knowing her. "We see this sometimes in cases where family takes advantage of an elder. It does not make you weak to be their father." That last sentence sat with me like a coat that fit. My children did not apologize. They did what people do when the ground shifts, they tried to behave as if it had not. Dana texted that we needed to move past the spectacle. Theo left a message about a misunderstanding. Patrick called and cried, only he apologized, and his apology slid around the sharp thing at the center. Elena sent no words, just a photograph of Lily reading on the porch steps as if to remind me of our better bridge. I did not respond to any of them for 3 days. I walked the house. I polished the handrails the way Marie showed me. I opened the cigar box and inhaled the dusty sweet of old paper. I called Ms. Valdez and asked to meet. She wore a cardigan the color of rain clouds and looked at me with interest. "Are you ready?" she asked. "For what?" "To stop being their bolstering beam." We filed the protective order, narrow and firm. I went to the courthouse with Gus in a jacket and my good shoes polished, and it felt like stepping into a version of the world where things had lines around them. We amended my will to include a specific gift for Lily, my grandmother's rocking chair and a small fund for books to be administered by Ms. Valdez until she is 25. We amended it to leave a donation to Marie's hospice. We included the no contest clause that would reduce anyone who challenged my estate to $1. It felt petty in a way and necessary in every other. In the weeks that followed, the district attorney's office made its decisions. They did not charge my children with the gravest possible offenses because the law is a careful instrument and because no one was harmed and because first times are often treated like last warnings. They charged them with something lesser but real, an attempt to tamper with a beverage and fraud. They were offered plea deals that included probation, community service, and a small fine. When the papers came, the printed names looked strange to me, like someone else's children wearing my children's faces. Mark called finally and asked to meet. We chose a coffee shop halfway to nowhere. He walked in with a hat on like a teenager and looked at the floor as if it owed him an apology. He said, "I do not know why we keep doing this to each other." I did not smile. "Because you like shortcuts," I said. "And I like pretending I can still carry you." He huffed a laugh, not amused. He told me he had taken the plea. He told me Dana was furious. He told me money was still bad. He looked me in the eye for the first time and said, "I do not know why I did it." "You did it," I said, "because you wanted the house more than you wanted to be my son." He looked as if I had slapped him with an open hand. We sat there in the smell of burnt espresso and boxed muffins, and when we left we did not hug. Outside, the wind was cool and clean, and a woman walked a dog that looked at me with honest curiosity, and I waved at the dog and it wagged its whole body as if to say, "You, old man, are seen." Elena did not meet me. She sent me a letter that was beautifully written and said very little. Patrick met me on my porch, which I allowed. He cried again, and this time I believed the parts that were about me. I told him I loved him and that love would not buy him an apartment. He took it like a man takes a vaccine, wincing, knowing it is for the best. When the headlines about my family's case appeared in our small local paper with their has-been font, I cut them out and put them in a file that says, simply, "Summer." This is what the summer was. It was when I found out my children were willing to make me sleep through my own life. It was when I stood up. On Sundays now I still make gravy. I put on the radio and let the announcer talk about weather and the local high school football game as if those things are the most important. Sometimes Lily comes, because I asked Elena if I could have her on my porch for reading and lemonade on Sunday afternoons, and Elena said yes without saying anything else. Lily brings her dog-eared book and a pencil and she draws the light on the floor. We sit in the quiet with the smell of tomatoes and rosemary and the hush of the ceiling fan. Lily tells me school news in the clipped, earnest way of a 12-year-old who believes everything is necessarily important if it happened to someone she knows. A few days ago, she glanced toward the kitchen and said, "You should not leave your drinks alone, Grandpa." It was a small dagger, but she said it like a weather report, and I nodded as if she had advised me to wear a hat. We have had the talk we needed to have, in small pieces that fit a young person. She knows her mother is not the villain she could be in another telling. She knows her grandfather has a spine. That is enough for now. Late in the month, the pastor asked if I would speak at a men's group about boundaries. I laughed when I got the request and then I said yes. I told a room of 50 men with bellies and busted knuckles and knees that click that there will come a day when loving your people looks like refusing to kneel on their behalf. I told them that if they have a drawer labeled the boring stuff, they should not put it off, they should go to an attorney, they should arrange their lives before their lives arrange them. I told them that you cannot pour from an empty cup, and you should not have to pour into hands that are busy pocketing you. A week later, I got a letter in the mail from a man I do not know who had been in that room. He wrote in a pencil blunt from being used for crosswords. He said, simply, "Thank you. I put my house in a trust. My boys will be mad. I will sleep well. When I go to bed now I do not walk every room. I know where the hinges are. I know my co-trustee would call if anything needed me. I do not think of the cameras I packed into a box in the attic, or the decanter that I threw away, the glass that still sits there because it was a gift from Marie, heavy as a prayer. I think of her hand on my forearm when we were young and we had not yet any idea which fights we would have and which we would leave on the table like a cooling plate. One night I took out the 3 letters I had written and did not give them at the party. I read them, and I cried the way men cry when the house is asleep and the cicadas do the talking. The paper went soft with tears in places. Then I put them back in their envelopes, and I put them in a file called Summer, and I shut the drawer. I have been asked if I forgive my children. My answer is that I learned the difference between a door and a gate. A door is either open or closed. A gate is something you can see through, and you can unlatch it when the time comes. I have closed a door they used to come through unannounced and empty-handed and full of appetite. I have left a gate open for their repentance. On the morning a new storm rolled in from the lake and the air went electric, I stood at the window and watched the trees flex. The cedar did the slow dancer's bow. The floorboard seen by the stove glowed for its brief hour. I made coffee and held the mug with both hands and let the steam fog my glasses. The world outside shook itself and then settled. I did not fear it. I had met worse under my own roof and watched it leave. A week later, on a Saturday with a sky so clear it looked polished, Elena came by. She called ahead as I had asked. She stood on the porch with a pie she had purchased, not baked, and a wariness she could not hide. We sat at the table like 2 people who have always known each other, which we have, and she said, "I thought you would never talk to me again." "I talk," I said. "I am not a wall. I am a man who built a fence." She nodded, thoughtful, and we ate pie that tasted like gratitude. She told me work was busy. I told her the rosemary was thriving. We tiptoed around the whole day of summer, the party that mattered and will always matter, and then she said, softly, "I am sorry." She said more after that, words I will keep because they are still tender in the air. There were reasons. The reasons do not excuse. She knows that. We sat and let silence carry what words could not. When she left, she kissed my cheek. When she got to the edge of the porch, she turned and said, "I will bring Lily Sunday." I said, "That would be good." That night, I poured myself a small glass of seltzer and sat at the table with Marie's recipe cards. I chose one I had not made since she died, her lemon cake, and I read it all the way through, the way she taught me. Then I baked, and the house filled with that smell that makes difficult people into children and children into the people you hoped they might be. I iced the cake and cut a small slice, and I sat in the window where the light is kind, and I ate it with a grin I had not felt on my face since the afternoon I told my children, calmly and without shame, that I would not drink what they poured for me. When darkness settled, the lake breathed a cool that made the curtains lift and fall. I took the trash out like a man with nothing to hide. I went to bed like a man who is not worried about who will be waiting when he wakes. I am not a pushover anymore. I am, finally, my own father. And this house, this cedar skin, these lemon-polished rails, this strip of light that crosses the floor at noon, is mine to guard until it is my time to leave it.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to the story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, Please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.